I never thought something like this would happen to me. Honestly, I don't think most people in Alaska ever imagine the dangers lurking beneath the pristine, snow-covered landscapes we call home. But I learned the hard way that nature has its own ways of reminding you who's in charge. My name's Jack, and I'm just a regular guy, an outdoorsman who made a living guiding tours and leading expeditions through some of the harshest wilderness in the world. It was the winter of 2021 when it happened. The sky was an endless gray canvas, the sun barely making its way through the thick clouds that had been hanging low over the mountains for days. I was guiding a small group, 5 people, just a casual winter trek to explore some ice caves on the outskirts of Denali National Park. Nothing too extreme, just a walk through the frozen wonderland, with a few icy tunnels to explore along the way. We weren't deep into the wilderness, but we were still far enough from civilization to make things complicated if something went wrong. I've always trusted the equipment and the weather forecast, but that day was different. A sense of unease had started creeping up my spine early in the morning, like something just wasn't right. It's hard to explain, but when you spend enough time in the wild, you start to pick up on things. Little details you can't quite put into words. We had stopped for a break, huddled around a fire. The wind had picked up, biting through our layers as we sipped hot coffee from thermoses. That's when the silence first struck me. It wasn't the normal silence of the wilderness, the kind you hear when the world is still and everything feels untouched. No, this was different. It felt as if the whole forest, the mountains, the very ground we stood on was holding its breath. I looked around. My clients, a family of 4 from the lower 48, were laughing and joking, but I could tell they were nervous too. Their eyes darted around, like they could sense it too, but no one dared speak up about it. I was about to say something when I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible crunching sound from the direction we'd come. I froze. It was too far away for any of us to have left tracks behind, but the sound was unmistakable. Did anyone else hear that? I asked, my voice sounding louder than I'd intended. They all stopped, suddenly quiet. The wind had died down for a brief moment, and we stood there, listening. The sound came again. Crunch, crunch. It was closer now. Footfall. But nothing was in sight. I'm not a paranoid guy, but something about the way the snow crunched. It wasn't right. It was too heavy, too deliberate. I motioned for everyone to gather up. We need to move, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Now. No one questioned me. They were already on edge, their instincts telling them what I couldn't quite put into words. We packed up quickly, though the unease in my gut was only growing stronger with each passing second. That's when we heard the scream. It was long, high-pitched, and cut through the air like a knife. The scream was so unnatural, so guttural, that I thought it couldn't have come from a human. The family froze, their faces going pale. I felt my heart race, a cold sweat breaking out on my back. Stay close, I said, my voice now sharp, commanding. We don't know what's out there. But as we began to move faster, the scream echoed again, this time much closer. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of something crashing through the trees. Something was hunting us. The thought hit me like a ton of bricks. Something, or someone, whatever it was, it had been watching us for longer than I cared to admit. I'd heard stories over the years, whispers, rumors about strange creatures, things that shouldn't exist in the wilds of Alaska. But until that moment, I'd never believed them. Now, I was no longer so sure. We were at the base of a small cliff now, the only way forward being a narrow, ice-covered path. I glanced behind us. The figure wasn't visible yet, but I could feel it. Whatever it was out there, moving through the trees at an impossible speed. I motioned for the group to hurry, my breath coming in ragged gasps. That's when we saw it. A shape in the distance. Tall. Too tall. It moved between the trees with a fluidity that didn't belong to anything I'd ever seen. Its outline was blurry, distorted like it was somehow flickering in and out of existence. We couldn't make out its features, but the one thing I was sure of was that it wasn't human. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. The wind picked up again, howling through the forest like a banshee's cry. The group was now in a full panic, their footsteps echoing in the otherwise still air. but no one dared speak. We were too terrified to ask the question that hung between us all. What had we just seen? We kept moving. The ice beneath our boots cracked as we climbed higher, and the noise of whatever was chasing us grew louder. My only thought was to get to the caves. They weren't far now, just another mile or so, but I had no idea if we would make it. We didn't know how much time we had. The caves were our only hope. We made it to the caves. Barely. The narrow entrance loomed before us, a jagged gap in the frozen cliffside that looked more like a mouth, waiting to swallow us whole. I pushed the group forward, my heart pounding in my chest, feeling the weight of their panic pressing down on me. I glanced behind us, but there was no sign of the creature. It was as if the forest had swallowed it whole. "Move!" I barked, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "We need to get inside now." I wasn't sure if the caves were safe. Hell, I wasn't even sure if we should have been here in the first place. But it was our only option. The family stumbled inside, their faces pale, eyes wide with fear. I followed them in, heart still racing, and the cold air of the cave hit me like a wall. It wasn't a warm place by any means, but it was better than being out there in the open. I quickly checked the entrance. There were no immediate signs of anything following us, but I knew better than to assume we were safe. I turned to face the group, trying to calm them down. "Listen, we're safe for now. Just stay together and we'll figure this out. We can't go back the way we came. We'll have to stay here for the night. It's too dangerous out there." They nodded, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. The dad, Tom, was clutching his wife, Sarah, his eyes darting nervously around the dimly lit cave. Their two teenage kids, Sam and Lily, were huddled close, trying not to look at me or at anything around them. The whole group was on edge, and who could blame them? I could hear the wind howling outside, but as I took a few steps deeper into the cave, the sound started to die down. The darkness was all-encompassing, and the air was thick with a strange, damp cold. I pulled out a flashlight from my pack and swept the beam across the cave walls. Ice formations hung down like stalactites, and the floor was slick with frost. We couldn't stay here long. I knew the cold could be lethal if we didn't keep moving, but the thought of leaving the relative safety of the cave was terrifying. It felt like we were trapped, but in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the thought that something even worse was out there waiting for us to leave our hiding spot. The tension in the cave was suffocating. The silence between us grew, and I could hear my own breath echoing off the walls. I glanced at the group. Everyone was silent, their eyes filled with fear and confusion. None of them knew what to make of what was happening. Then the sound came again, that same strange, crunching noise. It was distant, but it was unmistakable. I held up a hand to silence everyone. My heart skipped a beat. "Do you hear that?" I whispered, barely able to hear myself over the pounding in my chest. Everyone nodded, their faces stricken with terror. The crunching grew louder, closer, as if something was circling the cave, trying to find a way in. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was something else. "We need to go deeper," I said quickly, trying to keep my voice steady. Now, we moved quickly, scrambling through the narrow corridors deeper into the cave. The tunnel twisted and turned, and I could hear the sound of footsteps following us. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there. The air was getting colder, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Then we reached a chamber. The walls of this section of the cave were covered in strange, black markings. Patterns that didn't belong, like they had been carved into the ice by something unnatural. I had never seen anything like this in my years of guiding tours in Alaska. The markings were too precise, too deliberate. It was then that I realized we weren't the first ones to hide here. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. We weren't alone. A sharp, unearthly shriek echoed through the cave, vibrating the ice beneath our feet. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, surrounding us. The air grew thick with an oppressive energy, and I could feel the walls closing in. I turned to the group, but their faces were frozen in terror. Sam, the younger of the two kids, started shaking uncontrollably. His wide eyes were locked on something in the shadows behind me. "Jack, what is that?" he whispered. I didn't want to turn around, but I had to. When I did, my blood ran cold. A figure stood in the darkness of the cave, just at the edge of the light. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. The thing's face was hidden in shadow, but I could see its eyes, red, glowing, and unblinking. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything I could have imagined. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. All I could do was stare at it. The creature's movements were unnaturally fluid, like it was made of shadows itself. It wasn't just standing there, it was waiting. I felt a voice, cold and whispering, wrap around my mind. You shouldn't have come here. That was all I heard. But it was enough. I pulled the group back into motion, pushing them further into the cave. I didn't know how much time we had left, but I knew we couldn't stay here any longer. Whatever that thing was, it was coming for us. And it wasn't the only one. We kept moving, our breaths ragged, stumbling through the ice-encrusted corridors. I didn't dare look back at the creature, whatever it was. I knew it was still there, lurking just beyond the reach of the flashlight's beam. I could feel its presence, a cold weight pressing in on my chest, suffocating me. Every footstep echoed louder than the last, and the tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, an endless maze with no clear path to safety. Jack, what is happening? Sarah's voice trembled behind me. Her hand gripped my arm, but I couldn't stop to reassure her. Not now. Just keep moving, I said, forcing my voice to remain calm. We can't stop. We need to keep going. But where? My mind raced, desperately searching for an answer. We were deep in the cave now, deeper than I had ever intended to go, and every instinct was screaming at me to get out. But the exit, the only way I knew to get out, was behind us, and the thing that had been hunting us was still out there. And it wasn't alone. There were others. I could hear them now, faint sounds in the distance, shifting movements that didn't belong to any animal I knew. A low growl echoed from somewhere far ahead, and the air seemed to thicken as if the very walls of the cave were closing in around us. The temperature had dropped again, and I could see the breath of everyone around me, coming out in sharp, visible puffs. We're not alone down here, I muttered, more to myself than anyone else. Tom, the father, stopped for a moment. His eyes darted around the cave, searching the shadows. He wasn't stupid. He'd felt it too. We need to find an exit, he said, his voice low and urgent. Now, whatever that thing is, it's not the only one. I can feel them. I nodded grimly. He was right. There were things moving in the dark. Things that weren't human. We pushed forward, but the sound of the growls, the whispers, the rustling, it was getting louder, closer. It wasn't just one thing anymore. It was a chorus, a symphony of shadows that stretched out across the cave, surrounding us. I had heard rumors of strange occurrences in the wilds of Alaska, whispers of creatures that weren't supposed to exist, things that hunted in the dark, but I'd always dismissed them as just that, rumors. Now I was living it. The tunnel ahead opened into a larger cavern, but as we entered it, I felt a chill run down my spine. The walls were covered in more of the strange markings, black, jagged symbols carved into the ice. They twisted and spiraled, forming a pattern that seemed almost deliberate, like a warning. But it wasn't just the symbols that caught my attention. It was the floor, or rather, the lack of it. There was a hole in the center of the cavern, a massive pit that dropped straight into darkness. I shone my flashlight into it, but the beam didn't reach the bottom. Felt like the void, endless and hungry. I froze. Do you hear that? I whispered. The growls had stopped. The cave was eerily silent again, but this silence felt different, felt wrong. And then I heard it, a scraping sound, slow and deliberate, coming from deep within the pit. I couldn't see anything, but I felt it. Something was down there, something waiting. We have to get out of here, I said urgently, backing away from the edge of the pit. My heart was racing now, adrenaline flooding my veins. We need to go back the way we came, Tom said, his voice shaking. It's the only way, but I knew it wasn't. The creature wasn't out there anymore. It was down here with us. Whatever it was, it had us cornered, and it was playing with us. And now there was something else, something worse. I turned to look at the group. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with fear. Sam, the younger kid, was shaking uncontrollably, tears streaking down his face. I hated that I couldn't promise them anything. "We can't go back," I said. "There's something in those tunnels now. Something following us." Sarah stepped forward. "What do we do then?" I didn't have an answer. It was then that I heard it again. That growl. Louder. Closer. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something was moving in the shadows. Something big. My flashlight flickered, then went out. We were in complete darkness. I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder, but when I turned, there was nothing there. The growl came again, this time directly behind me. I spun around, and then I saw it. A face, pale, gaunt, with hollow, black eyes that seemed to stare right through me. The creature's skin was stretched tight over its skull, its mouth too wide, too sharp. It opened its mouth in a slow, deliberate motion, revealing teeth that were jagged, broken, and impossibly long. It lunged. I didn't have time to think. I grabbed the closest thing to me, an old, jagged rock, and swung it blindly at the creature. It hit something, but it didn't make a sound. The creature didn't flinch. The group screamed, and I heard them scatter, but I couldn't take my eyes off the thing in front of me. The creature didn't attack immediately, but its gaze was fixed on me. It was waiting. Then the ground beneath us shook, and we fell. The world flipped upside down. One moment, I was standing, trying to defend myself from the creature, and the next, the ground beneath us gave way. The whole cavern seemed to tremble as we plunged into the abyss. I felt my stomach lurch, and everything around me went dark as we fell, farther, faster, into the unknown. The fall seemed to last forever. I couldn't tell how much time had passed before we finally hit the ground. A sickening thud that knocked the wind out of me. My head spun, and I couldn't breathe for a moment. But when I finally forced myself to open my eyes, I saw nothing but pitch-black darkness around me. I struggled to sit up, my muscles sore from the impact. I coughed, tasting the dust and the dampness of the air. My flashlight was gone, and the only sound I could hear was the panicked breathing of the others. "Jack! Jack, are you okay?" It was Tom's voice, shaky but steady enough. "I'm here," I croaked, pushing myself to my feet. I reached out, my hand brushing against something cold and smooth. A wall, maybe? My heart was still racing, and I could feel the sweat dripping down my face. Whatever had just happened, we had to get out of this hole. But where were we? I tried to calm myself, to think logically. The pit we had fallen into, it was massive. It felt like the ground had opened up and swallowed us whole. I couldn't hear the growl anymore, but that didn't mean we were safe. We had fallen into a place that felt wrong, like the earth itself had been corrupted. I turned to the others, trying to reassure them, but the fear in their eyes mirrored my own. "What is this place?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Her hand clutched Tom's, and he held her tightly, his face pale with fear. "I don't know," I muttered, the words barely escaping my lips. "But we need to find a way out. This place, it's not natural." I stood still, listening. There was no sound from above, no movement. Whatever had been chasing us, whatever had been lurking in the shadows, was still out there, somewhere. But the silence felt too heavy, too still. It made my skin crawl. And then, in the distance, I heard it. A scraping sound. It was coming from below us. "Stay quiet," I hissed, motioning for everyone to stop. The scraping grew louder, then stopped, and the silence returned. I could feel something moving in the darkness, closer, always closer. It was in the air, an oppressive presence, like a storm waiting to break. I couldn't see it, but I could sense it. Whatever had been chasing us, it had found us again. "We need to move," I said, my voice tight. "Stay close to me. Don't stray from the group." We began to move through the darkness, our hands on the cold, uneven walls of the pit, trying to find some sign of an exit. The air was thick, cloying, and I could smell something foul in the air, rotting, decaying. It was as though something had died down here long ago and had never left. After what felt like hours, we stumbled upon a faint glimmer of light ahead. It was faint, distant, but it was enough to give us hope. I led the group toward it, my heart pounding in my chest. Every step felt like we were walking deeper into a nightmare. As we approached the light, it grew brighter. The walls around us became covered in more strange markings, those same jagged symbols from the cave above. But now they were glowing faintly, pulsing, like they were alive. I felt a chill sweep through me. Suddenly, I froze. There, in the center of the small clearing ahead, was a figure. It wasn't human. The shape was tall, like the creature we had seen earlier, but this one seemed different. Its body was distorted. Its skin stretched thin, with dark veins visible beneath it. It stood perfectly still, its face a mask of sharp, cruel angles. Its eyes, those eyes, were glowing red, the same piercing red as the creature that had been hunting us. Turned slowly, and I felt the breath leave my body. His gaze met mine, and I couldn't move. It wasn't just a creature anymore. It was something ancient, something old, older than the earth itself. "Jack?" Sam whispered behind me, his voice filled with dread. Before I could say anything, the creature moved. It didn't walk. It shifted. One moment it was standing still, and the next it was right in front of us. I felt the ground tremble beneath me, and I heard the others gasp. But there was no time to react. The creature lunged. It moved so fast, I didn't even see it coming. His hand shot out, its fingers long and thin, like claws. It grabbed Tom by the throat, lifting him off the ground with terrifying ease. "No!" I screamed, rushing forward, but I couldn't get close enough. Tom's eyes bulged in terror as he gasped for air, his hand clawing at the thing's wrist. But there was no escape. The creature's grip tightened, and in a sickening moment, Tom went limp. With a single twist of its arm, the creature snapped his neck. The cave fell silent. I was frozen in place, my heart pounding in my chest, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Tom, he was gone. Just like that. The creature dropped his body to the ground like a rag doll, its eyes never leaving us. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but my legs wouldn't move. It smiled. I didn't know how I knew it was smiling, but I could feel it. Its satisfaction, its hunger. And as it took a step toward us, its lips curled, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. It wasn't done yet. We weren't safe. The creature's eyes gleamed in the darkness, its thin lips pulling back in that dreadful smile. I could feel its gaze bore into me, sharp, calculating, as if it was savoring our fear. There was no escape now. Tom's lifeless body lay sprawled on the ground, a reminder of the fate that awaited us if we didn't act fast. I turned, my legs still frozen in place, my mind racing. The group was in a panic now. Sarah had collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably, while Sam and Lily were huddled together, their faces pale with terror. But I couldn't let myself show fear. Not now. We were already too far gone. The creature took another step forward, its long, spindly limbs making no sound on the cold, uneven floor. I could feel its presence, like a suffocating weight pressing down on my chest. It wasn't just hunting us anymore. It was enjoying this. It wanted to break us, to drag us into the dark. I had to do something. I glanced around quickly. The faint light from the glowing markings illuminated the space, but it wasn't enough. There had to be something, anything I could use. My eyes landed on a rock near the wall. It was large enough to serve as a weapon, but I knew it wouldn't stop the creature. Nothing would. "Run!" I shouted, my voice hoarse. "Run now!" I didn't wait to see if they heard me. I lunged for the rock, grabbing it with both hands. It was heavy, and my muscles screamed in protest as I swung it toward the creature, hoping to at least get its attention long enough for the others to escape. But it didn't even flinch. The creature turned its head slowly, its glowing eyes locking onto mine. It tilted its head slightly, as if considering me. Then, with a sharp, guttural hiss, it lunged at me. I barely had time to react. I swung the rock again, aiming for its face, but it moved faster than I could comprehend. The thing's long arm shot out, grabbing me by the wrist with terrifying strength. Twisted, and I felt the bone in my arm snap like a twig. I screamed, the pain shooting up my arm, but I couldn't let go. The creature pulled me toward it, its breath hot against my skin. And then, just as I thought the end had come, something miraculous happened. The ground beneath us trembled once again, but this time, it wasn't just the pit. It was a deep, resonating rumble that seemed to come from the very core of the cave. The creature froze, its expression changing, a flicker of something, fear, in its eyes. The air around us grew heavier, and I could hear a sound, faint but unmistakable. A low, guttural growl, but not from the creature. This was something else. A roar. It was as if the earth itself was answering. The walls of the cave began to shake, and cracks appeared in the ice around us. The markings on the walls glowed brighter, pulsating with an energy I couldn't explain. And in the distance, I saw movement. A blur of shadows, moving with an unsettling speed. The creature's grip loosened for just a moment, its head snapping toward the source of the noise. I took the opportunity to break free, stumbling backward, my broken arm dragging behind me. It wasn't the creature that made the next move, it was something else. Something much larger, much more terrifying. A massive shadow surged forward, towering over the creature. In an instant, it collided with the thing, sending it crashing to the ground with a deafening crack. The ground itself seemed to split beneath their struggle, and the entire cavern groaned as if it, too, was in pain. The new creature, much larger, more massive than the first, let out a roar that shook the very foundations of the cave. Its form was a blur of motion, its body covered in thick, matted fur and scales that gleamed in the dim light. It was like nothing I had ever seen, its eyes burning with a fierce, unearthly glow. It was the size of a bear, but its body was built for war. Muscular, thick with power, its massive claws slashing through the air as it fought. And it was fighting to kill. The creature that had been tormenting us, the one that had killed Tom, was no match. In seconds, the larger creature tore into it, shredding its limbs, breaking its body with terrifying strength. It was over quickly. The smaller creature, whatever it had been, let out a final, guttural scream before it fell limp. The larger creature stood over its fallen opponent, its chest heaving. It didn't look at us immediately. It turned, its gaze sweeping the cavern, its fiery eyes locking onto me for a moment. Then, without a word, it turned and retreated into the shadows. The rumbling stopped. The cave went still. I could hardly believe it. In a matter of seconds, everything had changed. The terror that had consumed us, the relentless creature that had been hunting us. It was gone. But we weren't safe. Not yet. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice low but urgent. "Now, while we still can." I turned to face the others. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide in shock. Sarah was still kneeling, her hands pressed to her face as she sobbed. Sam and Lily were huddled together, trembling. Tom was gone. I didn't have time to process what had just happened, or what that creature had been. The only thing I could focus on was getting out of this nightmare. The exit had to be close. "We need to move now," I said again, more forcefully this time. We began to scramble toward the back of the cave, where I could see a faint glimmer of light shining through. But the ground was unstable now. The aftershocks from the battle between the creatures had left cracks in the ice. We could feel the whole place shifting, slowly coming apart. With one last glance over my shoulder, I saw the larger creature's silhouette disappear into the depths of the cave, leaving us with only the memories of what we had survived. We had been saved, for now. But I knew one thing for sure. What we had encountered in that cave was only a fraction of the horrors that Alaska still held in its depths. And I would never, ever forget the things that were still waiting to be discovered. We made it out, barely. The passage we found led us to the surface, to the world that felt like a dream after everything we had endured. The sky, although gray and heavy with clouds, was still the sky. The cold wind bit at our skin, but it didn't matter. We were out of that cursed cave, away from the horrors that had chased us through the depths of Alaska's wilderness. For a moment, I thought it was finally over. But there's something you should know about Alaska, The wilderness, it never lets go. No matter how far you run, no matter how much time passes, it remembers. The trek back to the nearest ranger station was a blur. I barely registered the landscape around me. My body ached. My mind was numb. And I could feel the deep, primal fear that had taken root in my chest after that night. Tom was dead. He wasn't coming back. That thought alone almost broke me. And the others, they were too scared to speak, too terrified to look at one another. We made it back to the ranger station by sunrise, but no one there believed us. Not fully. Oh, they listened. Some of them took notes, some of them exchanged nervous glances, but in the end, we were just another group of tourists who had gotten too close to nature. A search and rescue operation was mounted for Tom's body, but when the team reached the area where we had fallen, they found nothing. Nothing at all. It was like the cave had swallowed him whole. When I tried to explain what had really happened, about the creatures in the cave, about the war that had been fought right in front of us, I saw the doubt in their eyes. They were too polite to call me insane, but I could see it in their faces. They didn't believe me. They didn't want to, and who could blame them? What we had experienced, what I had seen, there was no way to explain it to someone who hadn't been there. It was too monstrous, too impossible. The rest of us were offered counseling, but I refused. I didn't need to talk about it. What had happened in that cave, what I had seen, it was real. It was etched into my memory like a brand that could never be removed. But something else happened too. Something that started small at first. I began to notice things. Little things. Shadows moving in the corners of my vision. A chill on the back of my neck when I was alone. Whispers in the wind. And worst of all, I could never shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was as though the wilderness had not only remembered us, but it had marked us. We were still being hunted. A month after our return, I received a call from Sarah. Her voice was shaky, tight with fear. She told me that Lily had gone missing. The night before, she had been out for a walk near their cabin, and when Sarah had gone to check on her, she was gone. No sign of struggle, no tracks in the snow, just gone. I didn't say it, but I knew. I had the same sinking feeling that had plagued me since we left that cave. Whatever we had awakened, whatever had been watching us down there, it hadn't finished with us. And it wasn't just the creatures in the cave anymore. The entire landscape seemed to have become alive. It felt as though the land itself was shifting, hiding things beneath its frozen surface. I went to Sarah's cabin, hoping against hope that it was some sort of mistake. But when I arrived, there was nothing. The whole place was abandoned. The door was ajar, a faint scent of decay lingering in the air. The snow around the cabin was untouched. No tracks, no signs that anyone had ever been there. I searched the area for hours, but I found nothing. Nothing but that same silence. That same suffocating stillness that had surrounded us in the cave. And then, when I thought I was alone, I saw it again. Out of the corner of my eye, a figure. Tall, thin. It was standing in the shadows at the edge of the woods, watching me. I couldn't make out its face, but I could see those glowing red eyes. It wasn't human. I knew that much, and it knew I was watching. It didn't move. It didn't need to. It just stood there, in the darkness, waiting. I stumbled back, my heart racing. But then, something strange happened. The figure seemed to flicker like a shadow in the wind, and then, poof, it was gone. Just like that. But I knew what I had seen. The creatures, the things that we had encountered in that cave, they weren't confined to that one spot in the wilderness. They were everywhere. They were all around us. And they weren't finished with us. They never would be. I've left Alaska since then. I couldn't stay after everything that happened. I couldn't bear to keep looking over my shoulder, to keep feeling like I was being hunted. But even now, years later, I can still hear it. The whispers in the wind, the scraping sounds, the low growls that echo in my nightmares. The thing we encountered in that cave, whatever it was, is still out there and it's waiting. And I know now that it wasn't just a random encounter. It was a warning that some things in this world are not meant to be uncovered, that some places should be left undisturbed. If you ever find yourself alone in the wilds of Alaska, out in the frozen tundra, Don't be too curious. Don't stray too far from the path, because you might not be as lucky as I was. And if you see those red eyes watching you from the darkness, just run. Just run.